Marvin Bell was already asleep when the flashlight beam lit up his face. He blinked once, disoriented, eyes adjusting to the glare. The light wavered, then steadied, and a voice followed, flat, bored, routine. "Hey, you, get up." It was the third time this week he'd been rousted, but the first time it was by cops. The other nights it was store clerks, or the occasional drunk teenager who thought kicking an old vet in the ribs counted as a prank. Marvin didn't move at first. Not out of defiance, he was past that, but because it hurt. His right hip locked when the temperature dropped, and tonight the air was cold enough to make the bones in his leg feel like glass. He pulled himself upright, wincing as the familiar spike of pain ran through his back. The officer stepped in closer. One of them was young, barely shaving, his thumb twitching near his taser. The other looked tired. Not cruel, just exhausted. The kind of tired Marvin recognized, system tired, life tired. "You can't sleep here," the older one said. "I wasn't bothering nobody," Marvin mumbled, his voice hoarse. "You're trespassing," the younger cop cut in. "Private property. You've been warned." Marvin nodded. Didn't see a sign. Doesn't need one. He stood fully now, pulling his coat tighter. The left sleeve was torn, the pocket lining shredded. Inside it, he carried everything he owned: a half-pack of crackers, a laminated VA card, a plastic fork, and a folded paper with the name of a counselor who hadn't answered her phone in 6 months. One of the officers pulled out a notepad. Name: Marvin Bell. Date of birth: April 14th, 1961. The cop jotted it down, then radioed in. Marvin stood there shivering, staring past them at the street. The traffic rolled by, indifferent. On the corner, a digital sign flashed a promotion for a new energy drink. On the other side of the intersection, a bus idled, engine humming like a lullaby. The radio crackled. "Confirmed. He's got priors, 2 previous trespassing citations." That sealed it. "You're under arrest," the younger cop said. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Marvin didn't argue. He turned, slowly, the cold and pain making every movement feel underwater. The cuffs bit into his wrists, not brutally, but without care. Just another procedure. Just another number. They walked him past the back dumpsters, past the loading dock, past the yellow puddle he'd carefully avoided when picking his sleeping spot. The patrol car door opened with a click, and Marvin dipped his head to slide inside. The ride downtown was silent. No one asked why he'd chosen that wall, why he wasn't at a shelter, why he didn't have a family to call. No one asked what he'd done before the street, or what he'd seen, or what he'd carried home from a war that most people had already forgotten. Instead, they booked him fingerprints, mugshot, holding cell. The lights stayed on all night in there, and the metal bench was too short to stretch out. Marvin tried anyway. At some point, he dozed off, only to be woken by a sharp knock on the bars. Bell, courts in the morning. The courtroom was crowded when he arrived, not with people like him, but with cases just like his: black men, brown men, tired men, most with public defenders who greeted them with half-read case files and mumbled advice. Plead out. Don't fight it. You'll be out in a few weeks. His own lawyer was maybe 26, blonde, ponytail, high heels that clacked on the tile like nervous Morse code. "Mr. Bell," she asked, flipping through a manila folder. "Trespassing. 3rd offense. They're offering 60 days. Could be out in 30 if you behave." "I wasn't hurting nobody." She gave him a look not cruel, just realistic. "They don't care. They see 3 strikes. They see you behind a business. End of story." Marvin said nothing. She sighed. "Look, if you fight it, they'll push for 6 months. Maybe more. It's your call, but you should take the deal." He nodded slowly. He wasn't angry, not really. Anger took energy, and his had been drained years ago. Bit by bit, like blood from a slow wound. The judge arrived. The bailiff called the docket. The cases began. Most lasted less than 3 minutes. Guilty, 60 days, next. Guilty, time served, next. Then it was his turn. State of Maryland versus Marvin Bell. He stood. His lawyer stood. Then someone else stood, too, from the gallery. A figure rose slowly, every movement deliberate. A man in full dress uniform, deep blue with gold trim, ribbons across the chest, 4 silver stars across each shoulder. General Wallace D. Hayes. And with him came the voice that split the courtroom like a blade. Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant had nowhere else to go. The entire room turned. The judge paused mid-sentence. The bailiff looked uncertain. Marvin didn't even register it at first. It was like hearing a name in a dream, familiar, but impossible. Hayes stepped forward. The judge's eyebrows arched. General Hayes, I request permission to speak on the defendant's behalf. The lawyer leaned toward Marvin, whispering, stunned. Do you know that guy? Marvin didn't respond. His throat had closed. The judge, still confused, nodded. Proceed. And as Hayes made his way to the witness stand, all Marvin could do was stare. Not at the medals or the stripes, but at the man, at the past, at a ghost stepping out of memory and into the fight. For the first time in a long time, that Marvin Bell didn't feel like a number. He felt like someone worth standing up for. Marvin Bell remembered the day he came home by what it wasn't. There was no banner, no welcome ceremony, no brass band playing Stars and Stripes at the airport. He arrived at BWI on a Tuesday afternoon, the terminal filled with business travelers and families with strollers. He was still on crutches. Then his hip hadn't healed right from the shrapnel lodged near the joint. No one looked twice. His duffel bag was military issue but ragged, stained with a dust that still smelled like smoke and diesel. Inside, he carried everything: fatigues, a Bible, his bronze star, and a letter from his commanding officer that was supposed to make the transition easier. It didn't. He took a cab to his sister's place in Prince George's County. She hadn't expected him that soon. His discharge had been expedited after he failed a fitness eval, but he didn't want to wait in a barracks for paperwork to catch up. That night, they had fried chicken and sweet tea. His niece sat in his lap and asked if he was done with the Army forever. Marvin smiled and said yes, even though he wasn't sure what being done even meant. The next morning, he started calling the VA. It took 5 weeks to get an appointment. The woman on the line had been polite, but robotic. She asked about his service dates, his injury, his housing status. Then she transferred him, then again. Finally, someone told him to report to the Baltimore VA for evaluation. His sister drove him. They waited 6 hours in a room where the clock ticked louder than the television. Other vets sat slouched in folding chairs, older, some limping, some glassy-eyed. One man wept into a handkerchief. No one acknowledged him. When Marvin was called in, a doctor glanced at his chart for a full 90 seconds before asking, "Are you experiencing any recurring trauma, hallucinations, or suicidal ideation?" Marvin hesitated. He didn't want to say yes, because saying yes meant they'd send you to psych. Say no, and they assumed you were fine. "I've been having trouble sleeping," he said instead. Loud noises, The doctor nodded without looking up. "Night terrors." "Not exactly. It's common." The doctor cut in. "We'll get you on a schedule." The schedule was a 6-month wait for therapy, and a recommendation for group counseling in a basement room that smelled like bleach and resentment. He went to 3 meetings. He never spoke. After the 3rd one, he stopped going. His sister did what she could. She helped him file his claim for disability and cooked extra portions at dinner. But she had 3 kids, 2 jobs, and a boyfriend who didn't like having Marvin sleep on the couch. After 4 months, the tension hit a boil. "You gotta figure something out," she said one night. "I love you, but this ain't permanent." Marvin nodded. He didn't blame her. He'd stayed too long. He moved into a shelter in D.C., proper. It was supposed to be temporary, a stepping stone, just until the claim processed, just until he got steady footing. That was 6 years ago. The VA lost his paperwork twice. He had to refile from scratch the 2nd time. Each time he called to check the status. The hold music looped for 20 minutes before a voice told him, "Your case is still under review." When he asked what that meant, they couldn't say. In the meantime, he worked when he could, day labor, warehouse offloading, janitorial contracts that paid cash and asked no questions. His hip limited him, but painkillers dulled the edge. Some days, that edge came back sharp and he'd spend the afternoon curled behind a church waiting for it to pass. His bronze star stayed folded in the bottom of his bag. He used it once to convince a security guard not to throw him out of a bus station during a snowstorm. The guard let him stay 2 hours, then tapped him awake with a baton. People said, "Thank you for your service," like it was a spell. As if the words absolved the fact that they wouldn't look him in the eye. As if gratitude alone could lift a man off the street. He learned not to speak too much. When people saw the ragged edges of his story, they flinched. War made them uncomfortable. Homelessness made them avoidant. And a homeless black veteran. He was a triple threat to the illusion that America took care of its own. There was one spot behind a Korean church that let him sleep without hassle. He kept it clean, used a plastic tarp to stay dry. Even found an extension cord once and charged his phone when the building manager wasn't around. But that spot was fenced off last winter. From there, it was the metro underpass, then the library steps, then the alley behind the 7-Eleven. The irony didn't escape him. He'd done hard things, necessary things for his country, dug trenches in 120-degree heat, pulled bodies from wrecked vehicles, hauled a comrade on his back across a live field of fire. And now, what got him arrested? Falling asleep next to a trash can, the morning of his arrest. Marvin had been in pain, sharp, stabbing. He hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. The clerk who called the police didn't recognize him from the week before. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. The cops weren't cruel, just efficient. The holding cell was cold and smelled like bleach. A man in the next unit over spent half the night mumbling curses into his knees. Another puked in a corner. Marvin leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. He thought of Kandahar, of the sound mortars made when they landed just close enough to shake your ribs, of the way Hayes used to say, "Keep your boots under you, boys." He remembered one night in particular, early 2008. He and Hayes had been pinned down on a ridge for 16 hours. Night fell like a trap. There were only 3 of them left with working comms. Marvin had kept watch while the others rested. He didn't sleep at all that night. Too many ghosts in the dark. When the chopper finally came, Hayes had been the last one out. He didn't leave until everyone else was on board. That was the last time Marvin saw him. Until now, the library was quiet. The kind of quiet that hummed beneath fluorescent lights and smelled faintly of dust and plastic book covers. Marvin sat hunched over one of the public terminals in the back corner, 3rd row from the window, the chair squeaking every time he shifted his weight. His allotted 45 minutes were already half gone. He wasn't doing anything fancy, just reading the news. Headlines. Mostly, he didn't have a social media account, didn't bother with email anymore, but he liked to know what the world was doing. Even if the world didn't care much for men like him, most of it was the usual noise, sports scandals, political theater, a celebrity DUI. He clicked through absently, scanning more out of habit than interest. Then he saw it. General Wallace Hayes to speak at Deep Sea Veterans Summit. There was a photo current, sharp, same steel gray buzz cut, same high forehead and pressed uniform, a chest full of ribbons, the same unreadable expression that said, "I see everything and tell nothing." Marvin stared at the screen. At first, he wasn't sure it was the same man. The face had aged, sure, but the eyes hadn't changed, cold and clear, like glass over water. He leaned closer, reading the caption. Hayes, a retired 4-star general and decorated combat commander, will speak on post-deployment transition, veteran suicide, and systemic failures in veteran care. The summit will be held at the Hilton National Conference Center this Friday at 11:00 a.m. Marvin checked the date in the corner of the screen. 2 days from now? He sat back, letting it settle in his chest. He hadn't thought about Hayes in years, not actively. The memories came in fragments, dust storms, shouted orders, a cracked radio spitting static and death. Marvin had pulled Hayes out of a burning Humvee back in '08 just outside Kandahar. There was no fanfare then, no medal ceremony, just blood, smoke, and Marvin dragging 210 pounds of unconscious command weight across open ground. Later, Hayes had said one thing to him in the field hospital. "You saved my ass. Bell, one day I'll return the favor." Marvin never believed in favors. Still, seeing the name triggered something. Maybe not hope, but curiosity. And that was rare enough to be dangerous. He printed the article using his last 50 cents and folded it into his coat pocket. That night, He barely slept. His mind spun with old things, dust and oil. Field maps spread on the hood of a Humvee. The time Hayes chewed out a lieutenant for leaving a man behind, even if it risked the whole unit. The way Hayes never cracked in front of the men no matter how bad it got. He wasn't soft, but he was solid. A soldier could follow a man like that. Had followed. On Thursday, Marvin scouted the route. He knew better than to trust Google Maps alone. The Hilton Conference Center was all the way across town. 2 bus rides and a half-mile walk. His left shoe had split along the side last week, and his hip wasn't forgiving about distance anymore. Still, he needed to know he could make it. The shelter that night was full. He slept on a flattened cardboard box behind a boarded-up real estate office. His coat pulled tight. The article still folded like a relic in his chest pocket. Just before he drifted off, he whispered to no one, "Don't be a fool." Friday morning came cold and gray. Marvin was up before sunrise, limping toward the first bus stop. He hadn't eaten, didn't have fare either. He boarded the bus and waited for the driver to call him out. The man just glanced at him, nodded once, and kept driving. By the time he reached the Hilton, the lobby was already buzzing suits, uniforms, press. Marvin kept his head down. He knew how to fade. Years on the street had taught him that much. Just another shadow in the background. He approached the main entrance and saw the guards' hotel security. Ex-military by the look of them. Straight-backed, watchful. "Sorry, sir, closed event. Need a pass?" Marvin nodded. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped aside and leaned against a support column. Waited. Time passed. He counted suits, counted medals, counted clouds moving behind the high glass windows. A woman in a red pantsuit glanced at him, hesitated, then kept walking. Then he saw him, General Hayes, older, grayer, but unmistakable, walking briskly, flanked by aides and handlers, the kind of presence that made space bend around it. Marvin stepped forward. "General Hayes." The group paused. Hayes turned, and for the briefest moment, confusion crossed his face. Then came recognition. "Sergeant Bell," Hayes said, almost whispering, then louder. "Jesus." "Marvin." Hayes stepped forward and gripped his hand in both of his. No pretense, just force and warmth. I wasn't sure you'd remember," Marvin said. "I owe you my damn life," Hayes said. "Of course I remember." They stood there, hands still locked, until someone from Hayes's team cleared their throat. "We have to get moving, sir." Hayes turned, annoyed. 2 minutes. He looked Marvin up and down. "Where have you been?" Marvin shrugged. "Here. There. Working when I can. Staying out of the way." Hayes's mouth tightened. "You in housing?" "Not right now." "Benefits." Marvin smiled thin. "You know how that goes?" Hayes nodded. Not with pity, just a grim understanding. "I want to help," he said. "I mean it." "You don't have to," Marvin replied. "Just seeing you just needed to know I wasn't crazy, that you were real." Hayes stared at him. "Wait right here," he said, already walking back toward the entrance. "Don't leave. I'll be back in 20. But Marvin didn't wait. He slipped out of the lobby and walked down the block. Something in him twisted as he went. Not shame. Not regret. Just that old instinct to keep moving before someone told him to. He didn't want charity. He didn't want press. He just wanted to be seen. And for a moment he had been. That night, the arrest came. Back at the 7-Eleven. Same dumpster. Same wall. But everything after that would be different. Because General Hayes hadn't forgotten, and he was already making the next call. Friday morning, Marvin was up before the sun. He hadn't slept. Not really. Too much noise in his head. Not just the city sirens, wheels rattling over potholes, voices arguing 2 blocks down, but the internal noise. Old memories that never stayed buried. Sand in his boots. Fire in the air. Screams over comms. Men he couldn't save. He sat up slow, rubbing his hip. The pain was already there, like it was waiting for him to wake. His bed was the concrete stoop of a boarded-up daycare. He rolled up his coat for a pillow and tucked the VA card into the inner lining where he kept his ID and the folded printout with Hayes' name on it. At 6:07 he started walking. The first stretch was 5 blocks to the nearest metro bus stop. His breath came out in clouds, the cold cutting through his jacket like it wasn't even there. He checked a passing liquor store window to see if his collar was straight. It wasn't. He didn't bother fixing it. The first driver didn't stop. The second waved him on without asking for fare. Marvin gave a nod, silent thanks, and took the seat in the far back, keeping his bag in his lap like it might run if he let go. The bus was half full. 2 students, a nurse, a construction worker eating from a foil-wrapped breakfast sandwich. No one looked at him. No one asked where he was headed. The stop came near 18th and N. From there, it was a walk 16 blocks, and his hips started to scream around block 7. By block 10, he was limping hard. By block 15, he was clenching his jaw just to stay upright. But he didn't stop. The Hilton towered over him when he reached it, glass and stone and polished chrome, reflecting a city he barely recognized anymore. A line of black SUVs idled outside, tinted windows and government plates. Uniforms and lanyards flooded through the main doors. Marvin watched them from across the street, heart thudding slow but heavy. He was out of place. That much was obvious. His coat was threadbare. His boots were cracked at the sole. He hadn't shaved in a week, and the wind carried the scent of 2 nights without a proper wash. Still, he crossed the street. 2 security guards stood at the revolving door, earpieces in, expressions flat. They watched him approach, eyes scanning. Marvin didn't flinch. "Morning," one said, blocking the entrance. "Events closed. You on the list?" "No, sir," Marvin said, polite but firm. "Just here to see someone speak. No access without a badge." The other guard stepped closer. "Sorry. No exceptions." Marvin looked past them, into the lobby. He could see the signs, the banners, D.C., Veterans Leadership Summit. Beyond the registration table, a wide hallway opened to the main conference center, filled with clusters of people suits, medals, reporters, advisors, and somewhere inside, Hayes. He didn't argue. Just stepped aside and leaned against a concrete column 10 feet from the doors. A breeze whipped through the plaza, sharp and cold. He pulled his collar up and waited. And waited. Time passed. More arrivals, more black cars. He saw politicians, officers, even a news anchor he recognized from Channel 7. He ignored them all. His eyes stayed fixed on the entrance. Then finally he saw him. General Wallace Hayes strode through the revolving door, flanked by a pair of aides. He moved with purpose, not swagger. Everything about him said discipline, creased uniform, polished shoes, eyes sharp as ever. Marvin pushed off the column and stepped forward. "General Hayes." The name landed in the air like a drop of oil in water. Hayes stopped, looked over. A beat passed. Recognition took a second to kick in. Maybe it had been too long, but then Hayes's face shifted. "Bell," Marvin smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd remember." "Marvin goddamn Bell," Hayes said, stepping forward fast. His hand gripped Marvin's, firm, warm, real. "What the hell, where have you been?" "Here and there," Marvin said. "You know how it goes." "No, I don't," Hayes said. "But I should have. Hell, I should have found you." One of the aides leaned in. "Sir, you have to get inside." "Give me a minute," Hayes snapped. He turned back to Marvin, scanning him. "You look like hell," Marvin chuckled. "You should see the other guy." A pause. "You housed?" Hayes asked, voice low now. "Working." "No and no." "Jesus." Hayes shook his head. "You saved my life in '08, pulled me out of that fire. And now this." "It ain't your fault," Marvin said, and meant it. "System chews us all. Just got chewed a little longer than most." Hayes looked furious, but not at him. He pulled a business card from his coat and scribbled something on the back. "You call this number direct line. I'll get you someone at the foundation. We'll start with housing. Then we'll talk about what's next." Marvin hesitated, took the card slowly. "Appreciate it," he said. The aide tried again. "General." "I'm coming," Hayes snapped. He leaned in one last time, gripping Marvin's shoulder. "You matter." "Sergeant," he said. "You're not invisible." "Not to me." Marvin swallowed hard. That's more than most ever said. Hayes looked him in the eye. "Don't disappear." Then he turned and walked inside, surrounded again, swallowed by the crowd. Marvin stood there, the card in his hand, watching him vanish. He left the conference center without calling the number. Not yet. It felt too much like charity. Too sudden. Too clean. Life didn't work like that. Not his, but something had shifted. Not hope, not yet, just the possibility. That night, he returned to the only place that hadn't kicked him out lately, the alley behind the 7-Eleven. A thin wall, a broken light, the same old chill. He sat down, leaned back, closed his eyes. Tomorrow, maybe he'd call. But life didn't wait, because that night, before he could sleep, the flashlight beam returned, the same words as before. "Hey, you, get up." And this time the cuffs clicked shut. But everything was already starting to change. The first thing Marvin noticed was the smell. It was always the same. A mix of bleach, sweat, piss, and time. It lived in the cinder block walls, in the metal benches slick with condensation, in the floor that had been mopped 1,000 times but never felt clean. The cell door clanged shut behind him. "Have a seat," the officer said without looking at him. There was nowhere else to go. Marvin eased himself down onto the narrow bench. One hand braced against the wall to steady his hip. The pain was sharper tonight, maybe from the cold, or maybe from the weight of another arrest pressing down on his chest. Across from him sat a man with a swollen eye and dried blood on his chin. A teenager paced the back corner, muttering under his breath. Someone was snoring under a foil blanket in the farthest shadow, their breath ragged and uneven. No one made eye contact. That was the rule in holding. You stayed small, quiet, unmemorable. Marvin had gotten good at that. He didn't know how long he sat there, minutes, hours, maybe a day. Time didn't move in places like this. There were no clocks, no windows, just flickering overhead lights that stayed on day and night and a constant chill that made your bones feel hollow. At some point, a guard came by with peanut butter crackers and a paper cup of water. Marvin accepted both without a word. He kept thinking about Hayes, about the look in his eyes, the grip on his shoulder. He meant it. That's what shook Marvin the most. People say a lot of things. Hayes said less. But he meant every damn word. And now Marvin was locked up again. Hayes didn't know yet. Later, how much later? Marvin didn't know a woman's voice called his name. Bell, Marvin Bell. He stood slowly, joints crackling. The guard opened the door and gestured for him to follow. They walked a corridor painted pale green and lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The guard opened another door, and Marvin stepped into a small interview room with one table, 2 chairs, and a woman in a navy suit. She didn't look up right away, too busy flipping through a file. Mid-20s, maybe. Clean hair, stiff posture, law school energy. He knew the type. She finally looked up. "Mr. Bell, I'm your public defender, Aaron Shepard." Marvin sat down. She glanced at him. Then the file. "You've been charged with misdemeanor trespassing. 3rd time. They're pushing for 60 days. He nodded. "Figures. They'll probably waive the fine. But they're not dropping the charge." Another nod. She looked at him again. Really looked this time. Her voice softened, like she just noticed the limp, the hollow under his eyes. "You're a vet." "Yeah. Combat. Afghanistan. Echo Company. 10th Mountain." She scribbled something. "Discharge status. Honorable. I've got paperwork. Just not on me. Any priors besides trespass?" "Nope." She leaned back, thought for a second. "I'll see what I can do. But the court's overbooked. And to be blunt, they don't really care. You plead guilty. You're out in 30 with time served. You fight it, you sit longer. And they tack on conditions you probably can't meet." "I know the drill." Her expression flickered. "You've been through this before." "Enough." She nodded. "You got family?" "No." "You got housing?" "No." Her eyes lowered. "Then they're going to argue you're a public nuisance, repeat offender, that you're using city space illegally." Marvin exhaled slow. "It's not a crime to be tired." "No," she said quietly. "But they'll treat it like one." After she left, they brought him back to the cell. He lay down this time, stretching slowly on the bench, eyes on the ceiling. He traced cracks in the paint, counted screw heads on the vent. Anything to stay out of his own head. He didn't know if Hayes would even find out. Maybe the general had already moved on, forgotten the moment, buried it under a schedule full of photo ops and meetings. But part of him hoped, not for rescue, not for miracles, just for someone to remember he was still alive. The next morning, they called his name again. Marvin Bell, docket 43. They cuffed him loosely and loaded him into a transport van with 4 other men. 2 were still drunk. One had a black eye and smelled like vomit. They were processed through the courthouse basement, more waiting. more metal detectors, more eyes avoiding yours. His lawyer met him in the hallway. I pushed for the short calendar. You'll be up in 15. He nodded. She glanced at him. You okay? He didn't answer. She adjusted her binder and said, They're expecting you to plead out. Just say guilty, and it'll move quick. You'll be out in a month. Marvin didn't nod this time. He just looked past her toward the courtroom doors. Something in the air had changed. The courtroom was full more than usual. An extra row of observers. 3 camera crews, which didn't make sense for a trespassing docket. The judge looked agitated. The bailiff looked alert. Next case, State of Maryland vs. Marvin Bell. He stood, and then just as the judge lifted the file, a voice from the back row cut across the room. Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant had nowhere else to go. Heads turned. A uniformed man was standing, decorated chest, shaved gray hair, 4 silver stars on each shoulder. General Wallace D. Hayes. The courtroom rippled like someone had dropped a stone in still water. The judge blinked. General Hayes. Yes, Your Honor. Are you on the docket? No, sir. But I request permission to speak as a character witness on behalf of Sergeant Marvin Bell. The bailiff looked unsure. The judge looked stunned. Marvin didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath. Just the weight of the moment crashing in. Hayes hadn't forgotten. He'd come. For a long moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the air conditioning, humming faintly above the stunned silence. Even the judge looked caught off guard, as if the courtroom itself had just warped into something unfamiliar. 4-star generals didn't show up in misdemeanor court. They didn't stand uninvited. They didn't break routine, but Wallace D. Hayes was already moving. He walked down the aisle like it was a parade ground, measured steps, posture sharp, boots polished enough to reflect the fluorescence. He didn't speak again until he reached the rail. Your Honor, he said. General Wallace Hayes, retired. I served 34 years in the United States Army, including 5 tours in the Middle East. I am here on behalf of Sergeant Marvin Bell. The judge, an older white man with a perpetually furrowed brow, leaned back in his seat and tapped his pen against the docket. This is highly unusual, he said carefully. I understand, sir, Hayes replied, but I respectfully ask the court's indulgence. I believe my testimony is relevant to the character and service of the accused. The prosecuting attorney, a wiry man with slicked back hair, stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. The general was not disclosed as a witness. His testimony should be considered inadmissible. The judge turned to him. Sit down, Mr. Travers. If a 4-star general walks into my courtroom, I'm damn well going to hear what he has to say. Travers sat down slowly, lips tight. Hayes stepped behind the witness stand. The bailiff approached with a Bible. Hayes placed his hand on it without hesitation. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Aaron, Marvin's public defender, leaned over. Did you know he was coming? She whispered. Marvin didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice not to shake. Hayes adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the judge. I first met Marvin Bell in 2007. He was assigned to Echo Company under my command during Operation Mountain Viper in Kandahar Province. Sergeant Bell was a field medic and combat support specialist. In January of 2008, our convoy hit an IED while under fire. I was in the lead Humvee. He paused. Bell pulled me from the wreckage while the vehicle was burning. He carried me 70 yards uphill, under active enemy fire, with a shattered hip. He was 23 years old. Gasps echoed from the gallery. The judge scribbled something in his notes but said nothing. Hayes continued. He could have saved himself. He didn't. He saved me, and 2 others that day. Travers rose again. Your Honor, again, this is a trespassing charge. The defendant's military service, however honorable, is not relevant to the matter of illegal occupancy of private. Sit down, the judge said without looking up. Hayes didn't break stride. After the war, Bell was honorably discharged. Like far too many, he returned home to a country that had no plan for him. The Veterans Affairs system failed him. The support network failed him. He did not fail us. We failed him. The room held its breath. Marvin sat motionless, every muscle locked. He didn't want to blink. He didn't want this to end. Hayes shifted forward, voice lowering. You have a man before you today, not because he's dangerous, but because he's disposable. Because it is easier for the system to arrest a man for sleeping behind a store than to ask why he had no place to sleep. He turned now not just to the judge, but to the gallery. to the press, to everyone. If you convict him, it won't be a victory for justice. It will be an admission that the oath we take to leave no one behind is just words. Marvin felt something press down behind his eyes. Not tears. Not yet. Just pressure. He swallowed hard. His lawyer touched his elbow lightly. "We might have a shot now," she whispered. Marvin wasn't so sure. The system had gears older than justice. But for once, someone had thrown a wrench in the works. The judge cleared his throat. "General Hayes, are you aware that this is Mr. Bell's third charge of this nature?" "I am, Your Honor." "And you're still here to testify to his character?" "I would testify in every courtroom across this country if that's what it took." A few people clapped. The judge glared until it stopped. Hayes stepped down without needing to be told. He walked back to his seat in the gallery. The silence he left behind was thick, electric. The judge turned to Erin. "Defense may proceed." She stood, adjusting her blouse, and stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defense believes the prosecution's pursuit of this case is not in the interest of justice. My client is a decorated war veteran who has been systemically failed at every turn. He's not a threat. He's not a criminal. He's homeless." She let the word hang there. Homelessness is not a crime. Surviving in a country that has forgotten you is not a crime. Mr. Bell did not trespass out of malice. He was trying to stay warm, dry, and alive. Travers stood. "Intentions don't override the law." "No," Erin shot back, "but the law must be applied with humanity. Otherwise, it's not justice. It's punishment." The judge held up a hand. "That's enough." He folded his glasses and set them on the bench. "Mr. Bell," he said, "please stand." Marvin stood slowly, hands clenched behind his back. The judge looked at him a long time. Too long. "Then the charges are dismissed." "A beat." "Mr. Bell, this court encourages you to work with the Veterans Affairs Department to secure proper housing and support. I also strongly advise you to stay in close contact with General Hayes and any other official willing to assist." He banged the gavel once. Next case. Marvin didn't move at first. He wasn't sure it was real. Then his lawyer smiled and squeezed his arm. "You're free." He turned slowly toward the back of the room. Hayes was already standing, arms crossed. Their eyes met. Marvin nodded once. Hayes returned it. No big moment, no salute, just that look. "You're not forgotten." "You're not alone." Outside the courthouse, reporters circled Hayes like vultures around a lion. "Why did you come today, General? Do you know the defendant personally? Is this part of a new campaign?" Hayes said only this. "This country needs to stop punishing people it once called heroes." Then he got into his car and left. Marvin stayed on the courthouse steps a while longer. He didn't know where he'd sleep that night, but for the first time in years, he knew where he stood. It took all of 5 seconds for the video to go viral. A reporter from WJLA had captured the moment General Hayes stood in open court and declared, "We failed him." Another caught the judge's gavel dropping. A third, stationed outside the courthouse, filmed Hayes walking down the stone steps flanked by cameras. Questions. Chaos and silence. Marvin Bell stood just behind him, in the frame but not in focus. A shadow passing through history, but not invisible anymore. By the next morning, the clip had been shared over 2 million times. Hashtags exploded. Stand with Bell. Vet justice. Forgotten heroes. People tweeted things like, "This is what integrity looks like." And, "How is a war hero sleeping behind a dumpster?" Congressional aides clipped the moment for morning briefings. A few opportunistic politicians issued lukewarm statements. Others scrambled to schedule meetings with the general. Marvin didn't see any of it. He didn't have a phone, no TV, no Twitter. He found out when a stranger handed him a print copy of the Washington Post. Front page, bottom corner, homeless vet freed after 4-star general intervenes in court. There was a photo of Hayes, stern and commanding, followed by a smaller image of Marvin grainy, tired, eyes down. He didn't like the picture, but he folded the paper carefully, like it mattered. Because for the first time in years, he mattered. That afternoon, Hayes called in a favor. Actually, he called in 6. 1 to the VA, 2 to private housing nonprofits, 1 to a reporter he trusted, 1 to a real estate investor who owed him from a military contract scandal he kept quiet. And the 6th, that one was personal. Marvin was sitting on a bench near Union Station when Hayes found him. His coat was zipped up to the neck. His backpack sat between his feet like a guard dog. "Figured you'd disappear again," Hayes said, walking up. Marvin looked up slowly. "Wasn't trying to." "Bullshit," Hayes said. You walk out of that courtroom without saying a word, and I've got a dozen reporters asking where the hell you went." Marvin shrugged. "Didn't think anyone needed to hear from me." "Well," Hayes said, "you're wrong about that." He handed Marvin a paper bag. Inside was a sandwich. Roast beef. Still warm. "You gonna lecture me next?" Marvin asked, unwrapping it. "No," Hayes said. "I'm gonna drive you somewhere." "Where?" Hayes smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Somewhere with a door that locks and a bed that doesn't smell like bleach." The apartment was in Southeast, nothing fancy, but clean. Fresh paint. Working heat. Second-floor unit in a red brick walk-up with a view of a park Marvin hadn't visited in years. It had a small kitchenette, a bathroom with new tile, and a mattress wrapped in plastic. "This is yours," Hayes said, "at least for the next 12 months. Covered by a Veterans Relief Partnership, quiet program, off the books." Marvin stood in the middle of the room and said nothing. His backpack sat at his feet. His fingers kept twitching. Hayes didn't push. He just walked to the window and looked out. "I know it's not a miracle," he said. Marvin exhaled. "No such thing as miracles, just time and paperwork." Hayes turned. "That's the truth." They sat for a while in silence. Marvin didn't unpack, didn't move much at all. The world felt tilted, like he'd stepped off a ship and hadn't found his footing again. Finally, Hayes stood. "There's a contact number on the fridge. You'll have a case manager, weekly check-ins, job counselor, if you want it. You're not locked in, but you're not alone." Marvin nodded once. "Why me?" he asked. "You saved my life," Hayes said. "This is me paying interest." Marvin shook his head. "That was 15 years ago, and I'm 15 years late," Hayes said. "Doesn't mean I don't still owe." Hayes left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Marvin stayed frozen on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the blank wall. Then, finally, he took off his coat. And for the first time in 6 years, he hung it on a hook. Over the next few days, things started to change slow, strange, and unfamiliar. A knock on the door brought a woman named Lacey, 29, former Army Reserve, now a case manager. She was kind but efficient, asked questions with empathy and a clipboard. "Have you used any substances in the past week?" "No." "Do you have access to meals?" "I'll figure it out." "Any immediate health concerns?" Marvin paused. "Just old ones." She nodded. "We'll schedule a VA follow-up. You've got coverage now? And options?" Options. It was a word that felt foreign. The press tried to find him again. A few reporters left notes with the building manager. One sent flowers. Another emailed a generic Gmail account Marvin never used. He ignored them all. Let Hayes be the face. Let them talk about policy and reform. Marvin wasn't a soundbite. He was a man trying to remember how to breathe without flinching. One evening, he walked down to the park across the street. Kids played on swings. A man fed pigeons with stale bread. The air smelled like grass and street food. A bench near the fountain had a plaque dedicated to those who returned and those who never came back. Marvin sat there, hands clasped between his knees. His phone buzzed one of those prepaid flip phones Lacey had given him. "Unknown number." He answered. A gravelly voice spoke. "Heard you're off the streets." Marvin smiled. "Took a war to make it happen." "Sometimes," Hayes said, "you need to win the right war at home." That night, Marvin unpacked. He laid out the only things that mattered: his VA card, the laminated photo of Echo Company, and his bronze star still scuffed, still real. He didn't frame it. He didn't hang it. He just placed it on the nightstand and turned out the light. And for the first time in years, the dark didn't feel like a threat. It felt like rest. Marvin wasn't used to mornings like this. No sirens. No shouting. No shuffle of boots lining up in shelter halls or the rustle of bodies shifting beneath threadbare blankets. Just quiet. A heater humming low. Sunlight leaking through beige curtains onto a floor clean enough to walk barefoot. He sat at the edge of the bed, blinking like a man just pulled from a long, underwater sleep. This wasn't home. Not yet. But it wasn't the street either. His first full day in the apartment, Marvin cleaned everything. Not because it was dirty. It was almost sterile, but because it gave his hands something to do. The rag and the motion helped drown out the fear humming under his ribs. Fear of stillness. Fear of failing. Fear of finally having something to lose. He scrubbed the sink, wiped down the door handles, resorted the only clothes he owned, and stood staring at a cupboard he had nothing to fill. The fridge had a gallon of water and a leftover sandwich from Hayes. It would do. Lacey came by again the next day. She brought a box of pantry staples, canned beans, rice, oats, and peanut butter. She also brought a second-hand microwave. "No strings," she said, setting it down. "Donated. People care." Marvin didn't argue. But he didn't believe that last part either. People might care, but they didn't know. Caring from a distance didn't feed you. It didn't change courtrooms or get a man off a sidewalk when the shelters were full. Still, the microwave worked. The beans warmed. He didn't complain. A few days later, the first reporter found him. He didn't knock, just waited near the gate outside the building. Tall guy, shiny shoes, clean shave. One of those voices that always sounded like it was being recorded. "Mr. Bell, just a moment. Do you have anything you want to say to the American public?" Marvin kept walking. "People are calling you a symbol of the system's failure. Do you agree?" He didn't stop. The man kept following. "General Hayes says you're the reason he's launching a national initiative for veteran housing. Don't you think your story deserves to be told?" Marvin turned just once, just enough to say, "It ain't a story. It's a life. Mine." And then he walked away. Later that night, Lacey called. "Media's trying to turn you into a case study," she said. "We can put a privacy block on your housing record if you want." "Do it," Marvin said. "Already done." The problem wasn't that people wanted to talk. It was how they wanted to talk. They wanted a clean arc, a redemption story, something with a beginning, middle, and triumphant end. They wanted Marvin to smile, stand beside Hayes, talk about hope and healing and the great American comeback. But what they didn't want, the in-between, the appointments, the therapy forms, the job counselor who called twice but didn't follow up, the social worker whose eyes glazed over when Marvin explained how hard it was to sleep in a room alone after years of sleeping light in public, half dreaming through danger. They didn't want the reality of starting from rubble. His first therapy session was over video call. The woman was in her 30s. Calm voice, thoughtful pauses. She asked about combat, about injury, about the transition home. Then she asked about the years in between. He didn't answer right away. "They say it's like falling through cracks," Marvin said finally. "But it's not. A crack is small. You can climb out of a crack. This was more like gravity. Something pulling down so slow you don't notice until you can't see light anymore." She said nothing, just nodded. For the first time in years, someone let the silence mean something. After the third session, she told him something that stuck. Starting over doesn't mean erasing the damage. It means building with it, letting it shape you, not bury you. He wrote it down on the back of an old receipt, folded it into his wallet. On a Thursday, he visited the VA clinic again. Lacey had scheduled it, and Marvin showed up early. A win in itself. The waiting room was full of other vets, old, broken in different ways. A man with burn scars down one side of his face nodded at him. Marvin nodded back. The nurse took his blood pressure. The doctor checked his hip. The physical therapist gave him a new set of stretches and told him if he kept at it, the limp might improve. "Time and pain management," she said. "You keep moving. Things change." Marvin didn't smile, but he agreed. Hayes called once a week, just to check in. No speeches, no pressure. "You good?" he'd ask. "I'm trying," Marvin would say. That's all anyone can do. Then Hayes would hang up. No goodbyes. Just a connection. A signal that the world still had one line left that didn't go dead. A month passed. Then two. He found a routine morning walks to the corner store for coffee. Short trips to the park to watch the world spin without him. He signed up for a part-time maintenance program through a city job initiative. They gave him a uniform, a schedule, something to do with his hands. It was minimum wage and temporary, but it was something, and he'd built whole lives with less. One night, Marvin stood in front of the bathroom mirror, not to admire himself, just to look, to see the face people were tweeting about, the symbol they wanted. He touched the scar on his hip through his pants, watched his reflection, waiting to feel something. Maybe pride, maybe peace. Instead, he just nodded once, then turned off the light. The day Marvin visited the school was overcast. Lacey had called 2 weeks earlier, asking if he'd be willing to speak to a group of high school seniors for Veterans Day. A civics teacher had read about him in the paper. Apparently, they'd been studying the justice system and the way it sometimes failed the people it was supposed to protect. "You don't have to say yes," Lacey told him. "They'll understand." But Marvin had already said yes, not out of ego, not to play the hero, but because something inside him whispered, let them see you before they forget you too. He wore his cleanest jeans, a pressed button-up, and the same boots he'd worn in court the day Hayes stood up. Still scuffed, but solid, just like him. The school was in Ward 8, not far from where he used to sleep behind a chain-link fence. When he walked through the front doors, he caught a faint whiff of floor wax and cafeteria pizza, the past and present, overlapping like transparency sheets. They led him to the library. Rows of teenagers sat cross-legged on a rug, phones in their hands, heads half tilted. A few teachers stood off to the side, nodding politely, waiting for a speech. Marvin didn't give them one. He just talked. He told them about enlisting at 19, about how war breaks things in ways you can't always name, about coming home and finding out that no one remembered what you did, only where you didn't belong. He didn't dramatize it, didn't beg for pity. He just told the truth. He told them how sleeping on concrete made you think in different shapes, how a bronze star didn't mean much when you were asking a stranger for a sandwich, how silence, when it becomes your only defense, starts to rot your voice. And then he told them what Hayes did, not just standing up in court, but remembering him. One student, thin, sharp eyes, wearing a hoodie that read "No excuses," raised his hand. Why didn't you fight back sooner, like sue the system or something? Marvin smiled. Because when you're drowning, he said, you don't ask for a life raft. You just try to breathe. And by the time you realize you're still alive, you're so far from shore, you forget what it even looked like. Another student asked, do you feel like a hero? Marvin shook his head. No, I feel lucky and guilty and tired and thankful all at once. They didn't clap when he finished. They just looked at him like they'd seen something real. That was enough. On the walk home, it rained. A soft, honest kind of rain. He didn't rush, just pulled his collar up and let it soak in. The neighborhood had changed. Gentrified corners. Fresh paint. But some pieces remained. The cracked sidewalks. The kids popping wheelies down the block. The same mural of Frederick Douglass staring down the street like he dared someone to rewrite history. Marvin passed the 7-Eleven where he'd been arrested. He stopped for a moment. There was a new security camera above the dumpster now. A no loitering sign. A different clerk behind the counter. He walked inside, picked up a bottle of water, paid with his new debit card. No one looked twice. When he stepped back outside, he stood for a minute in the same spot where they'd cuffed him. Same wall, same brick, but a different man. That night, Hayes called. How'd the talk go, he asked. I didn't embarrass you, Marvin said. You never did. A pause. Then Hayes said, we're opening another 3 housing centers, 1 in Chicago, 2 in the South. Bell Initiative's picking up steam. You still calling it that? Marvin asked, half joking. Hayes was quiet a moment. You started the fire, he said. I just made sure people saw the smoke. Marvin didn't know what to say to that, so he said what mattered. I'm still here. Damn right you are, Hayes said. Talk soon, before bed. Marvin lit the small candle Lacey had given him for his shelf. Vanilla scented, a joke gift from her first visit. Your place smells like a locker room, she'd teased. Now it smelled like home, or something like it. He pulled the photo from his drawer. Echo Company. 15 men. Tired faces. Dirt in every line of their skin. He'd taped it above his bed. Next to it, his bronze star, still unframed. Still his, and underneath, a folded note Hayes had left him in the apartment that first night. You don't leave men behind. Marvin turned out the light. He lay back in bed, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't famous. But he was no longer forgotten. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. He was ready for it. Marvin Bell's story isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. It reminds us that heroism doesn't end on the battlefield, and survival off it often takes more strength. His journey exposes a brutal truth systems forget the very people they depend on. But it also shows that one act of remembering one person willing to stand up can disrupt that forgetting. The lesson is simple, but urgent justice requires presence, not just in the courtroom, but in how we see, hear, and value the unseen. We cannot claim to honor veterans if we ignore them when they fall. Dignity isn't something to be awarded, it's something we owe. Thank you for taking the time to experience Marvin Bell's powerful story with us. If it moved you, made you think, or opened your eyes to the unseen struggles around us, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, not just to stay connected, but to stand with voices that often go unheard. Your support helps us keep telling real stories that matter, and we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, reactions, or questions. What resonated most? What do you want us to cover next? Your feedback shapes what we do, and your voice helps amplify the impact.